you can literally walk under the main altar in St. Peter's Basilica to St. Peter's tomb, but it's really like a tomb above the original bones, if that makes sense. The bones are still where they were. So it's like 4 layers, and all the things you can't see with your naked eye as a tourist, we were like literally in the foundations of all of this. And it was just unreal. The very first place we stopped, she says, your feet are standing on like the original Roman streets from like 200, 250 BC in a pagan cemetery. Like you're standing on it, and like, please don't touch the walls because these are the original walls. And we're literally standing looking at a mausoleum, like a cemetery, right? Tombs, urns, coffins, like these elaborate marble coffins. These were all pagans, obviously before Christ. This was 200 or 300 years BC. And they found it, and they have been digging it out, right? And like discovering how this had all come to be. And it turns out like the way this all fits together, to keep this brief, is this was all part of, right next to this was Nero's circus. So if you've heard of Emperor Nero and, fiddled when Rome burned, that whole thing. So he had this circus, which is like basically an outdoor amphitheater, and did all the things they did in those things, including crucify Christians later on. So at the time of the cemetery, this was before Nero, but then, go several hundred years into the future past that, after Christ was crucified, St. Peter's martyred in Rome, and he's crucified upside down in this circus, like in this like amphitheater. So they take his bones and they bury him next door, like near the old pagan cemetery. So this is like kind of the history, but we're literally it's hard to even describe. We're standing here looking at the cemetery that was there 300 years before all of this happened. And then we proceed, we see lots of different artifacts, and we end up literally seeing St. Peter's tomb, which is a very tiny little, discreet, like it's not much to look at, right? There was like an old column next to it. You could tell it was a special thing, but it was like small because it was also secret, right? Effectively secret until Constantine became emperor. But anyway, to be there and be like, so this is like in the 1900s, they've been doing these excavations. This is not that old. And they found this tomb, and they found a lot of archaeological indications. These were Peter's bones. And then it turns out you're standing here looking at them, and then they say, look up, and there's like holes through all these levels above you, and you're seeing the dome over St. Peter's Basilica. And you see all these people, the 50,000 people walking around way up there, and we're standing here, where it all started in having a church in Rome in the first place. So what was really interesting, though, is like you have this mausoleum, and then when Constantine became emperor, which I think is maybe 380, so several hundred years after St. Peter was buried here, he decided, because he was the first Roman emperor to endorse or allow Christianity. And so he's like, we need to build a church here, right? And so they built the first cathedral over St. Peter's bones on top of that mausoleum. And so they couldn't remove the mausoleum. So what they basically did was fill it in with dirt, and they built on top of it, which is how most things happen in these ancient cities. But you can see the floor, like of the original cathedral, right? And then above, and then in the 1600s during the Renaissance, they're like, we need a big old church. They built the biggest church in the world still in the 1600s, and that's St. Peter's Basilica. Well, under St. Peter's Basilica, above the original church, is this whole layer that's like where they bury most of the popes and a lot of the other important religious officials. So it's a mausoleum there, and there's that's, you can literally walk under the main altar in St. Peter's Basilica to St. Peter's tomb, but it's really like a tomb above the original bones, if that makes sense. The bones are still where they were. So it's like 4 layers, and all the things you can't see with your naked eye as a tourist, we were like literally in the foundations of all of this, and it was just unreal. And when you're down there, it's very humid, it's very tight, it's kind of claustrophobic. They have to preserve it. So it makes sense why it's so exclusive and why it's so difficult to get these tickets. But it's kind of like getting tickets to the Masters if you're a golf fan, right? But for religious and historical and archaeological reasons, so much better, actually. And to have us find a time that we won the lottery, that was the time that we're going to be in Rome on our next to last day, was unreal. So there's way more to talk about with Rome and the Sistine Chapel and the Colosseum and all the things. But I really wanted to focus on this idea of exclusivity. So how can you charge? In this case, they didn't really charge much, like $10, but you can, right? So if you can create a lot of exclusivity, so maybe this is your one-on-one VIP day, or this is like, I'll come to you and do a deep dive with you in person. There's always room for that like highest tier of product. In this case, the highest tier of access. There's There are more higher tiers than what we experienced. I'm sure if you're a dignitary or whatever, but for the public, I mean, this was really exclusive access, and we didn't need to pay very much for it. But had it not been a lottery, and they would have said it's this much money, and I would have paid more for this than the limousine boat in Como, right? Because it was that exclusive. And so that's the theme I want to leave you from one of our many experiences in Rome.